Te reo ererangi o te mānia. This episode was produced in Otatahi by Plains Media, with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Spin Me a Tale with Tessa Trolove. Let's step into a world of dragons endearing with Avis and the Promise of Dragons by Healther McQuillan and published by Ahoy, an imprint of the Cuba press in 2019. Close your eyes and let the magic carry you away. All day at school, Avis enjoyed the secret that she was keeping. There were plenty of chances to tell one of the other girls about the predator-proof fence, the tunnel house full of lizards, and the smuggling operation, but Avis wasn't even tempted. She enjoyed having a secret all to herself. That was the point of secrets, she thought, knowing something that no one else did. She could never understand the way other people seemed so willing to part with their own secrets. It was such a waste, like when people threw a whole apple in the school rubbish bin just because they didn't feel like eating it right now. Waste annoyed Avis. At the end of the school day, her secret remained just that. She grabbed her backpack and, walking as fast as she could without actually running, Avis turned out of the playground and towards Melinda's. She was jittery with excitement about where she was headed. To calm herself, she silently chanted the combinations to the tunnel house doors. She was sure she had them right. If Melinda had left with Percy that morning, the place would be empty and therefore all hers. That feeling was almost as delicious as having a secret. While she felt lonely at home each afternoon, the idea of being alone in a new place was exciting, tinged with the idea that she was trespassing, but not quite. She had a key. Avis was bent over, unzipping her school bag to get it, when a sharp shove sent her face forward onto the hard footpath. "Oh, sorry," said Drake, snarling. "I didn't see you there, Mavis." Avis kneeled and put her hand on her grazed chin. It wasn't bleeding, but it stung at her touch. Drake started kicking her bag along the grass verge as if it were a football he was dribbling down the field. "Give that back," she yelled. The key to Melinda's gate fell out of the unzipped pocket and Avis scrambled to pick it up and shove it in her shorts pocket. Drake passed the bag to his mate William with a lifting kick. William deliberately missed it. It landed heavily. Avis heard her lunchbox crack. Avis looked at their faces. They were all grinning, except for Archie Young. He looked sorry. "Oh dear, I think something just broke," said Drake, and he unzipped the main bag and started to tip out the contents. Avis's books went fluttering into the gutter, where the wind ruffled the pages. Her sweatshirt was kicked aside and the lunchbox, empty because she always ate all of her lunch, was tipped out along with a few pens, a hairbrush, some hair ties and a couple of novelty rubbers that had been at the bottom of her bag for months. The lunchbox, the one she had had since she was 6, was cracked right across the lid, splitting Sleeping Beauty's face in half. Drake Snelling grinned. "Trust Mavis to have a princess lunchbox," he said. "Never mind, Aaron Miller will buy you a new one." He threw it to William, who dropped it again, then threw it to another boy. They carried on, passing it and dropping it, making the split in the lid wider each time. Avis stood on the path, hanging her head. She felt powerless to do anything or say anything to help herself. She knew that later on she would think of a clever thing to say or a brave thing to do, but no ideas came now, except for the thought of crying, and she had the sense to hold the tears back. Sooner or later the boys would stop and go away. Other kids on their way home from school walked quietly around them, some stepping off the path onto the road to take a wide berth. Then the boys stopped throwing the lunchbox and let it fall. A tall, shambling figure was scuffing the path with his sneakers, eating a hot pie from a white paper bag and carrying a can of fizzy. "Bruno!" Avis called. Her brother stopped chewing and stared at his sister standing in the middle of the footpath, with the contents of her school bag strewn all over the place, and her handful of boys strolling casually away in different directions. "They broke my lunchbox," she sobbed. In her relief at having Bruno come to her rescue, Avis forgot to hold back her tears. They streaked down her cheeks, and when she wiped them, the salt stung the graze on her chin. She whimpered. "Pick up your stuff and stop being a baby," said Bruno, scuffing his way towards her. "You're embarrassing yourself." "They broke my lunchbox," said Avis again, thrusting the pink plastic pieces in his face so he could see how badly she had been treated. Bruno snarled as he walked right on by her. "Time you got rid of that thing. Time you grew up and faced the real world. It's not all pretty and pink, is it?" She shoved the broken lunchbox pieces into her backpack and picked up her other belongings. Her breath was catching in her throat and she wasn't going to cry again. Her grazed chin throbbed. She wiped the back of her hand across her nose, took a deep sniff, and unlocked the gate. Avis dropped her bag by the gate and made sure that the padlock was firmly closed so no one could get to her here. Once that was done, she felt as if she could breathe normally again. She tried to forget about Drake and the smashed lunchbox and Bruno. The walk up the drive seemed longer than it had the day before. Darker, too. Deliciously so. She walked around the edge of the veranda, opened the pest-free fence and punched in the code at the entrance to the shed leading to the tunnel house, feeling important and grown up to be doing this all by herself. The door swung shut and self-locked behind her. She carefully put on the paper suit that was too big for her, the paper overshoes and hat, and with a trembling hand punched in the code for the internal door. The door opened and she stepped into cool, damp calmness. A gentle chittering greeted her and a few thin branches shuddered as lizards shifted position. Avis breathed in the smell of damp leaves and semi-tropical flowers. Even though she was allowed to be there, well, sort of, it felt like she was intruding. She walked slowly along the path, stopping every now and then to look for lizards. "Hello, gorgeous," she said to a shiny copper-skinned skink, wiggling under the leaf litter. "I won't hurt you. I promise." She spotted a few different lizards this time. One green and goggle-eyed, one that she first mistook for a piece of bark, another that clung to a branch with a rosy bulge under its chin. But behind the screened-off enclosure of the tiju choker, nothing. Not a flicker of movement or a hint of colour, though Avis stared and sat as still as she could. Behind her, cutting through the gentle hum of the air conditioning, she heard a tiny cough. She heard it again, a couple of croaky barks. She turned and found a mottled green lizard watching her, its open jaw emitting the strange noises. "Are you sick?" she said. What if the lizards got sick while she was looking after them? What if the tiju choker had hatched and escaped? Avis really didn't know how to look after lizards, especially baby lizards. With that great ball of worry in her stomach, she walked back to the door and let herself out. The joy of the secret and the job and the thrill of being here alone had all vanished. As she hung up the paper suit, she glanced at the stack of folders on the desk. On top was a notebook with a handwritten label, The Legend of the Tiju Choker. Avis slipped the notebook off the pile and flipped through the pages of hand-drawn maps and notes of Melinda's journey. It was in cursive writing, which Avis found hard to read. The sun moved behind the trees and she realised that she'd better hurry if she was going to beat Dad home. Bruno wouldn't care where she was, but if Dad arrived home and she was missing, he might start asking questions. She took the notebook with her to read later. She wanted to know as much as she could about the tiju choker and would return it tomorrow. Avis assured herself that this was borrowing rather than stealing. There was no milk again. Avis complained to her father. Bruno went to the dairy and bought himself a pie and a Coke, but didn't bother getting any milk. There was no point saying anything about the Drake Snelling stuff. Her father would tell her to stand up for herself. She'd heard it before. "It's a thoughtless phase," her father said. "Lay off Bruno a bit, okay, Avi? He's got a lot going on at the moment." Dad didn't even notice my grazed chin, thought Avis bitterly. It's not only Bruno going through a thoughtless phase. She put the pink pieces of her lunchbox into the recycling bin, unsure if it was the recyclable type of plastic. From now on, she would have to take her lunch to school in an old bread bag. A storm came that evening, a real doozy of an early summer storm. The day had been warm and windy, but just before tea, big black clouds rolled in. The thunder and lightning were an overture to the main event, the hail that pounded down and blocked the gutters on the roof, causing waterfalls to stream over the windows. Avis's father raced out in his t-shirt to fling a cover over the car. He came back drenched and stinging from a multitude of small bruises. "If you tidied the garage, then the car would fit in there again," Avis said. "Leave it, Avis," said her father. "I'm working on it." Bruno ventured out of his room and scooped up a handful of the icy hailstones from outside the front door. The biggest of them were like marbles. "Ah, so you aren't hibernating after all," Dad said. Bruno responded with a fake laugh. "Ha ha, very funny, Ralphie," and went back to his room, leaving the hail melting on the kitchen bench. "Can you wipe that up, Avie bird?" asked her father. "I'm working on it, Ralphie," she snapped, and stomped off to her room where she tucked herself under the duvet. Melinda's notebook was difficult to read with the hastily scrawled handwriting and all of the scientific words she used. But Avis stuck with it. She wanted to learn as much as possible. Maybe tomorrow she would see the Tiju choker. Her mind was full of lizards and legends even after she'd fallen asleep. Sunshine, birdsong, and excitement woke Avis early on Saturday morning. As she pulled a pair of shorts from her bedroom floor, the chocolate biscuit packet rustled in her pocket. Avis very nearly ate them for breakfast, but decided that after her lecture to Bruno the day before, she should look for something healthier. As there was no milk again, she settled for mashed overripe banana and jam on toast. She pushed the padlock key into a zip-up pocket in her shorts and, as an afterthought, dipped into the emergency jar for the last $5 note to buy some milk from Papa Lou's Dairy on her way home from Melinda's. She would spend a couple of hours with the lizards and be back before Bruno and Dad finally roused themselves, usually sometime after 10 o'clock. Into her bag she placed the notebook. Avis had read more as she'd eaten her breakfast, taking care not to get jam on it. On the last few pages, Melinda had been trying to make scientific sense of the mythology around the Tiju choker. She had not come up with any scientific explanations for the idea of humans and lizards being connected by a promise and a diamond, but she had lots about the stories of it becoming invisible. Avis had especially enjoyed the notes about real creatures that could make themselves almost invisible, like cuttlefish and chameleons and the glass octopus. She got the dictionary out to try and understand words like metabolism, something about how the body processes certain chemicals, and cacao, which turned out to be close to cocoa because it was the name of the tree and the seeds that cocoa and chocolate were made from. There was a warning about cacao she couldn't quite make out because of Melinda's handwriting. The footpath steamed as the melted hail from the last night's storm evaporated. The new day had started hot and promised to get hotter. Everything smelled fresh and clean, but Menagerie Street was a mess. Along the roadside were twigs and leaves that had been blown down by the wind. A niggling anxiety started in Avis's stomach. She walked a little faster. Close to the corner, a large branch lay across the opposite footpath. Two men were wrestling it away from their blocked driveway. Avis hurried on. The worry grew bigger as she ran around the corner. More branches littered the footpath and she had to step carefully over them to get to the gate. She fumbled in her pocket for the key and unlocked the padlock. The gate scraped across the weeds as she slipped inside, pushing the lock shut after her. The driveway would need to be cleared of fallen foliage before Melinda could get her van back in. Beside the drive, bedraggled and tattered, lay a peacock feather. Avis picked it up. Instead of standing tall and proud, the feather was bent in the middle and flopped over limply. It wasn't until Avis reached the back garden that she saw the worst damage. A large branch had crushed the external air conditioning system. High up, another limb had split away from the tree and was hanging by its bark on top of the tunnel house. Avis nearly cried as she quickly punched in the combination, dropped her bag and pulled on the paper booties and hat, forgetting the suit in her rush, and entered the numbers for the internal tunnel door. The first thing she noticed when the door swung open was the heat. The air was warmer than it had been 2 days ago, and the inside of the tunnel house was distinctly tropical under the strengthening morning sun. A copper-brown skink skittered across the path in front of her and scuttled under a rock. A cloud of tiny flies hovered in front of her, and Avis kept her mouth and nose covered as she pushed through them. In the middle of the tunnel house, the fruit fly boxes lay tumbled where the splintered tree limb had gashed a hole in the plastic. The ground around the toppled boxes was a wriggling mass of tiny white maggots. Avis tried to step over them, but still squished a few with her shoes. She looked up, and it seemed as if the roof was moving. Dozens of green and blue and brown geckos were clinging to the inside of the plastic with their sticky feet and chittering as if they were very pleased with themselves. 2 days ago, the tunnel house had felt cool and sleepy, but now it was abuzz with activity. She looked to the far corner where the Tiju choker may or may not have been hiding. All seemed normal and still. The fine netting was still in place, and the plastic roof and walls around it were undamaged. Until now, with the hum of the air conditioner silenced, the chirp of the happy lizards had filled the air. But as Avis approached the netting, a high-pitched humming started up. All at once, the lizards on the roof scuttled back down into the foliage and went silent. Avis walked slowly towards the enclosure. The humming intensified. It would have been an irritating sound if it had kept at one pitch, but it modulated slightly, almost a warble. Avis reached the netting and peered through, trying to locate the source of the noise, but it shifted, as if more than one creature were making it from many different locations, one after the other, or perhaps one creature moving very quickly. Something blurred in front of Avis's eyes and was gone. The humming continued, but now it came from lower down, behind the dense bush of glossy leaves. The Tiju choker. It had to be. A lone green gecko took this moment to dash from the back of the enclosure in a zigzag fashion up the plastic wall. It veered past the hole and disappeared down into some ferns, as far away from the humming as it could possibly get. Avis frowned up at the punctured roof. The elusive Tiju choker still hummed from the bushes and had not made any attempt to get up there. It must not be sticky-footed like a gecko, she figured. But there were plenty of geckos here, and if they got back up on the ceiling, it wouldn't take long for every single one of them to escape through that hole. Avis looked at the netting around the enclosure. If she could get it down, then it could be used to cover the gash in the roof. If only she had a ladder. But first she needed to make sure that the Tiju choker was safely in a box. She pulled the empty fruit fly box over beside the enclosure, kneeled into the warm soil and began to dig with her hands underneath the netting that had been buried in a narrow trench and weighted down with large stones. She was able to loosen it, so there was soon a gap large enough for her to crawl under. She slithered through and kneeled inside the enclosure. Damp earth hung to her bare knees. Avis crawled carefully among the low ferns, looking for any sign of the hummer. A fern frond tickled her face as she moved to brush it away. She felt something slip from her pocket of her shorts. Avis gasped when she realised what it was. The chocolate biscuits! Melinda said not to bring any food in. She reached to grab for the packet but was not quick enough. A whir of air over her head, a swooping blur. The wrapper crinkled and crackled and moved. Avis stared. A gleaming blue lizard with a fat belly staggered out. Nostrils flared and protruding eyes twirled. It let out a tiny burp and sank to the ground. "You little greedy guts," said Avis, laughing with delight, and she reached out a finger to stroke the distended belly. The lizard's head snapped around, lips curled back to show a jaw full of sharp white teeth that latched onto Avis's finger. "Ouch," she said, as tiny teeth pierced her skin. Despite the prickling pain, Avis had no desire to retaliate. The creature was doing its best to stick up for itself, and she really shouldn't have laughed at it. Using her other hand, Avis carefully prized the jaws open to release her punctured finger. She placed the lizard back on the ground and sat back to watch it, as she sucked at the blood droplets that beaded from two tiny wounds. The scales on the Tiju choker's back were as smooth and shiny as the copper skink, but they glimmered with the same iridescent blue as Percy's tail feathers. The lizard let out a rumbly hum that reverberated around the tunnel house. Then it spotted its tail and did a quick, startled jump. Twirling eyes spun to look at a pair of polished green wings with yellow tips. The lizard stared at all four of its feet with their long claws and ogled at a blue-scaled body, and repeated the process, amazed, as if seeing itself for the very first time. Then the lizard's wings stretched as if they were being pulled like putty. Already chunky legs thickened, the tail swelled and body bulged until the skin split right down the middle of its belly. Avis looked on in horror, but the lizard gave a quick shake and the blue-scaled skin slowed off and fell to the ground like a piece of cellophane. The lizard was now the size of a kitten and the colour of fuchsia flowers, purple tinged with a deep pink. It yawned and Avis saw the small sharp teeth had grown too. They would do a lot more damage if they were to snap at her now. The lizard looked at Avis with sparkling golden eyes and started to hum again. She felt her eyes mist with love as it crawled over to her and started sniffing around her pocket with its long snout. She was able to get a closer look at the wings that were folded back across its body. They were ribbed with strong, flexible bones, and the membrane appeared to be made of layers of shimmering silk. The snout nudged her again. "I don't have any more biscuits," she said. "I really shouldn't have brought those ones in here, but I forgot about them." She pulled her pockets inside out to prove that there was no more chocolate. A crumpled $5 note fell to the ground. The lizard's humming became a whine and set Avis's teeth buzzing. She pressed her fingers in her ears, but the hum grew louder. It wasn't biscuits it wanted, it was the chocolate, cacao, like in Melinda's notebook. Then Avis remembered the scribbled warning beside the word. She had had trouble reading it. "Maybe I should wait until Melinda gets back," she said. "I don't want to make any more mistakes." But how can this handsome creature be a mistake? Eating chocolate made it visible. What harm could it do to give it more? These thoughts came to her as sharp realizations. The whining intensified, and all other thoughts, like caution or worry, couldn't find room to settle in her buzzing head. "All right," she said. "I'll go and get some more chocolate. She stopped herself short saying promise. A smidgen of caution had managed to settle in. It was one thing to make a promise to a skink and another to promise to a Tiju choker. "I'll use the milk money. Dad and Bruno will just have to have toast." How quickly I made that decision, Avis thought, enjoying the sense of certainty it gave her. It's almost as if somebody else made it for me. She scrambled back under the netting and tucked the end of the screen down into the dirt. The hole in the roof was still there, but her first priority now, she was very sure of this, was to get chocolate for this luminous creature. The other lizards seemed keen to be as far from the humming as possible, and Avis hoped they'd stay hidden on the ground. The Tiju choker's hum returned to a more pleasing frequency, and it fluttered into the middle of a soft fern. The pink and purple scales took on the soft green leafy patterns of its new nest as the hum turned into a snore. The creature had almost faded from view. "You need a name," said Avis adoringly. "I think I'll call you Humbert." That's all for today's adventure on Spin Me a Tale. Don't miss the next chapter coming your way next Saturday at 9:30 a.m. on Plains Media, broadcasting on 96.9 FM. Stay curious and keep the magic alive.